Hi, everybody. Bob Olson here with Afterlife TV. You can find us on afterlifetv.com. This is where we search for evidence of life after death and ask the meaningful questions around that subject. Wow, today, what an amazing time we're going to have. I'm excited for you. I'm excited for me. We have an author to a book which is written about his near-death experience that has just hit New York Times bestseller, not number 2, not number 5, not number 20, number 1 on the New York Times bestseller list. It's such people want to hear about this subject. They want to learn more about it, and this is proof of that. And speaking of proof, the title of it is Proof of Heaven. There you go. Well, I'll back it up a little bit. Proof of Heaven, a neurosurgeon's journey into the afterlife. There's a picture of him. You guys can see him beside me. Welcome, Dr. Eben Alexander. We're so happy to have you here.
Well, thank you, Bob. It's great to be here.
Yeah, this is really exciting for me. It's exciting for a lot of people who are familiar with Afterlife TV and been watching Afterlife TV for about a year now. We only started about a year ago. And people have heard a lot about near-death experiences. Yours is really unusual. It's a very unusual near-death experience, as you found out after you finally started researching them, which was after you wrote the book, right?
During the process of writing the book, right.
Yeah, you wrote down all your experiences, and, well, we'll get to that, right? But you wrote down all your experiences before you started doing the research. Really smart stuff, advice from your son there. Why don't we just start with your background, because it's your background also that makes this story of yours so unusual, so significant. Kind of reminds me a little bit of Dr. Brian Weiss when he first came out with Many Lives, Many Masters. Right. Tell us about that background.
Well, I grew up in a scientific family. My father was an academic neurosurgeon, and he instilled a very strong sense of science as the path to truth. Majored in chemistry, then went to Duke Medical School and did my neurosurgical training at Duke and at Harvard. And then I spent about 15 years on faculty at Harvard Medical School at the Brigham and Women's and the Children's Hospitals, and thought I had a very good idea about how the brain and mind and consciousness all worked. And it was against that background that I then had my NDE. It changed everything that I thought about that relationship.
Well, yeah, which is really cool, because what I love about this. Can I call you Eben?
Yes, or Eben.
What I love about this, Eben, is that first of all, you were that kind of skeptic that didn't really think too much about it at all, right? I mean, that was something for other people.
I really understood it, right? And that meant that there was no real way to explain any kind of an afterlife, no way to explain how soul or spirit or consciousness could live beyond the death of the brain and body.
Well, it reminds me of my own experience. I was a private investigator who, only looked at the evidence. I never had any evidence of the afterlife, and it wasn't until my father passed that I decided to look into it, And in your case, you had this experience, made you aware of things that you just weren't looking at earlier. I think that why don't we start off with what happened to sort of put you into this coma and so that you had this NDE.
Okay, I think just to cut right to the chase, it was about 4 years ago right now. Hit me like a freight train. 4:30 in the morning. I woke up, severe back pain, and then over the next 3 hours or so, that got much worse. Severe headache. And then I remember my last words to my wife and son: "Don't call 911. Trust me, I'm a doctor. It's just muscle spasm." But I was already so far gone with severe headache and slipping into coma that I didn't realize what was happening to me. And then I was just gone, and I was gone for a week. I had a grand mal seizure. I don't remember anything beyond that moment. My wife did call 911. And they came and packed me up and took me off to the hospital, but I was gone. I was already done for.
Really cool, really interesting story, because now, so you're in a coma for a week. I'm curious, and I recognize, I'll say this ahead of time, I recognize that just because you have a near-death experience doesn't mean, you understand everything that happened. but I love to explore things that I haven't run into before, and maybe you probably haven't thought about before. So you're in a coma for a week. Any sense at all on whether this near-death experience happened in a second? Maybe the second you went into the coma, halfway through the week, throughout the whole week? I know time, you get the whole time issue there. You do a really good job explaining that. Any sense?
Well, one thing I can tell you is the whole experience felt like it went for years. I mean, I was in there a very, very long time. And of course, I realized when I was in that realm that time flow in that realm was completely different and much freer than time flow in the earthly realm. And in fact, from that outer realm, we have access to any part of our space-time here. And it explains so much about things like reincarnation and deathbed visions and all of that, and appearance of departed loved ones in near-death experiences. But to get to your question, all I know is that it happened, for the most part, deep in coma. There were a few anchors to earth events, that is, to people in the earthly realm, that were hinged mainly around the 5th and 6th day of my 7-day coma and into the 7th day morning. And those things kind of helped to peg at least those particular events along that 3-day interval, although so much of it, as I said, seemed to last for centuries. I mean, it was amazing. I had no memory of my life before, of my earthly existence, although I was made aware of Earth during the journey inside. But the meningitis was so severe, it had wiped out all my kind of personal memories, and that was very helpful. I mean, that was, I think, a part of what helped make my journey very illustrative of near-death experiences in their ultra-reality at large. So that was helpful, but very hard to say exactly when it all happened, but most likely occurred over several days that I was in this coma.
Definitely, it sounds like it. A couple things, it really is significant that you did not have any sense of your human earthly personality at that time. I think that's one of the things that makes it so different. Your experience over other near-death experiences. I think most people do remember who they are. They even see their bodies, that sort of thing. You didn't. Why do you think? You say you think it really almost brought your near-death experience to a new level because of that, because you weren't really aware of your earthly existence. Why is that? Why would that make it better?
Well, I think in a sense, what ended up happening is because of the severe meningitis, and meningitis is probably the perfect model for human death because it very specifically attacks the whole outer surface of the brain, the neocortex. That's the part that makes us human. Everything that we experience as a human being in terms of seeing things, hearing, language, understanding, our relationship with things around us, relationships with people, all of our memories of life, all of our consciousness is put together in the cortex. And by wiping out my cortex, that gave me based on my previous view of neuroscience, there should have been no way to have any kind of a rich, ultra-real, interactive experience, an odyssey that seemed to last for years. I mean, that should not have been able to happen at all in a brain that was like that. And in fact, I came up with 9 hypotheses in the months after my coma when I was writing this up and trying to understand it, 9 hypotheses that might have explained that ultra-reality in the intense, interactive, and very rich fabric of this prolonged journey. And none of those hypotheses worked to explain that this could have happened in my brain. The conclusion is that it was a very real experience because it really happened. It did not happen in my brain. And it did not happen in the physical universe. And that's a very important thing to take away from my lesson. And even though the meningitis had provided a setting where I did not remember personal details of my existence on Earth. There were tremendous lessons that I was taught deep in coma, all about the reasons for our existence on Earth and really the reasons for existence of the whole universe. And in a sense, I would say that my experience is the exception that proves the rule, because it was not your, quote, typical, unquote, near-death experience, and yet by showing that a very rich consciousness exists independent of the brain when the brain is dead. That is the biggest part of the lesson from my journey, which supports the eternity of our consciousness and of our spirit and soul.
Yeah, it's certainly probably the most compelling evidence, that this was not a hallucination, that this was a real experience that you had. But when you say that, it's interesting because you also, I know that the bacterial meningitis that you had, you don't even know how you got it, right? They have no idea how you got it.
Right. It was very rare. I mean, spontaneous E. coli meningitis in adults is less than 1 in 10 million annual incidents. We never found a reason. I mean, in those rare, the 1 in 10 million cases, you can find that there's some problem with the immune system, possibly involving HIV, possibly involving diabetes or some other medical condition. And I didn't have any of those things at all. And so my physicians never found a cause. And that, I think, has helped to keep me focused, that it was a very rare disease, exceedingly rare. And then, of course, to be driven into coma so rapidly, I went into coma in a few hours. And if you look at the literature for just kind of bacterial meningitis in general, if the patient goes into coma in the first few hours, and that's the history you have when they get to the emergency room, already they're down to less than 10% chance of survival of that illness then and there. And by not responding to antibiotics for the better part of that first week, and by having a declining neurologic status that then was not showing any signs of recovering towards the end, I was down to about a 2% chance of survival and no chance of a neurologic recovery.
Right. So they would have expected you'd be in a vegetative state if you were. All right. So with that, let me think about this. Put this in order. So you come down with this rare disorder that they have no idea what caused it. It also happens to be the perfect disorder to have to really prove that this is proof of heaven, or at least give us compelling evidence that what you had was a real experience, because there was no activity going on in the brain. Right. And you're supposed to really, probability-wise, you're supposed to die or be in a vegetative state, and you live, and look at you now. You take all those things into account, and I have to ask you, do you think that this was all meant to be? Do you think this had some purpose behind it, meaning that somebody knew that you were going to spread this message after it all?
Well, I will tell you that initially I was completely blown away by the experience, just as are millions who have had near-death experiences and come back, because that ultra-reality is so kind of shocking and astonishing. And of course, as I would mention it to people around me, I didn't even realize then how sick I'd been and how close to death I had come. Yeah. And they would say, "Oh, yes, you were very, very sick. We can't even believe you're coming back at all." And the message to me was, don't talk too much about that incredible experience deep inside, because, everybody's just assuming you were so sick that anything could happen. So my original intent was to write it up as a neuroscientific report and to somehow explain how that sense of ultra-reality could happen when no part of my brain was still working that could have offered that up.
Yeah.
And so that's what I did for a long time. My older son, as you alluded a minute ago, was very wise. 2 days out of the hospital, he came home and saw me and was shocked that I was back at all. And he said, "Well, if you want this to be of any value, write down everything you can remember. Do not read anything about near-death experiences or physics or cosmology. Do not talk to anyone who was there when you were waking up." It was very sage advice indeed. And I spent the next 6 weeks wrote about 20,000 words of everything I could remember from deep within coma, and then started reading the near-death literature and was astonished at all the similarities to my experience, and that in fact my experience seemed to support those others, and they supported mine very strongly, and yet mine also very strongly suggested that this is a real experience in a very real place, more real than this earthly realm, and that it really happened and did not happen in my brain nor in the physical universe. And that's when I started to really appreciate the power of what my story was telling me. And I resisted the thought, oh, this happened for some purpose. You know, I was a physician, scientist looking at this and trying to be objective as I could. And with that mindset, you know, to think that there was something special about me didn't cut it. And of course, now what I realize is that this is something that we are all familiar with. And that's why I look at this as a reminding of souls, of something that souls know deep inside, even if they're heavily veiled with this kind of pseudo-skepticism of our modern era. Yeah. They feel the reality of this when they hear my story, and that's why I think the book is taking off. And it's not really a special thing about me.
It's 12 o'clock.
But it's special about the message itself, and that it resonates with people, and they understand. Of course, there's so much more to our existence than this little materialistic view that it's all birth to death and nothing more. And people know that.
Well, I agree, but, you know, and all that, and also your credentials behind it. You know, people love, they appreciate and give more credibility to someone with your background than someone like maybe from my background who, you know, doesn't come from a scientific background, can't evaluate everything as a scientist would. People do appreciate that. They are always trying to find reasons to believe in these sorts of things, the afterlife and evidence of the afterlife, and you give them, you give a lot more people who maybe never would even think about it a reason to pay attention to your story. You know, that makes you special.
well, I will tell you that I've read a lot of NDE reports, and I have learned a tremendous amount from some absolutely beautiful, rich descriptions, and many of them were not from MDs or PhDs or any of that.
Right.
And so that the real wealth of this literature is just in the heartfelt love that people give in returning from that realm. So sad that, you know, an MD degree kind of helps to get it out there, but the reality is I had to go through this journey as someone who had a deep understanding of the brain, even though when I came back, when I was starting to wake up, I didn't remember any of that. You know, I didn't even remember my family members, much less my neurosurgical knowledge. But I did remember that amazing and beautiful odyssey deep inside coma. And it helped me a lot after I'd written all that down to then start going into the near-death experience literature and read some beautiful, incredible stories from many, many people that helped me to confirm my own experience. And like I said, they were not MDs or PhDs, but they had been there.
Yeah. Well, and I agree. I think maybe, you know, your audience, what's important about your message and coming from you is just that it'll reach an audience that might not necessarily be open to it before, and now they will be. You know, I think that's
right.
It. And there's a lot of people, obviously, everybody who's been watching Afterlife TV here, you know, a good portion of them are just happy to listen to the near-death experiences of, you know, people who are not scientists. So it's true, but you reach a whole new segment of society. The other thing I got to say is I watched you on TV a couple of times, and you also have a great way of not allowing the skeptics to get under your skin. First of all, you speak very articulately, but you also, when they come at you with the skepticism, I couldn't tell the difference when they were coming at you with remarks about believing your experience. So you're very even keel in that way. That's helpful, you know?
Well, it is helpful, and I mean, I think we're all here trying to get closer to truth. You know, we're all in this together. It's not a battle.
Yeah.
And I embrace those that come with an open mind, very questioning, with a healthy skepticism. that's a good thing, because that's the only way that we're all going to get closer to knowing the truth of our existence. Occasionally, I get the kind of closed-minded, pseudo-skeptical type that may be kind of going after, my credentials or whatever.
Yeah.
I will tell you, I had to learn a tremendous amount about consciousness, far beyond what I ever needed to know as a neurosurgeon. As neurosurgeons, we need to know a little bit about consciousness, but given the fact that we don't even understand how general anesthesia works, and we use that every day, we've done it for 150 years,
wow.
We don't have a clue how it takes away consciousness. That should give you an idea of how little we really know about consciousness in our conventional neuroscientific world. I had to learn a whole lot more, and it involved something called the hard problem of consciousness, which is probably the deepest kind of scientific philosophical question known to all of mankind, and probably the one that is the furthest from ever being solved. And also had to learn a tremendous amount about the enigma of the interpretation of quantum mechanics and what that told me and tells all of us about the true nature of consciousness and what a profound mystery it is.
It's amazing. And so you sort of became a student again in order to be able to spread this message.
Well, I had to study hard for 3.5 years, probably read more than 300 books to try and get to an answer. And when I wrote my manuscript, it's actually about 4 times as long as the current book, because it had to explain to me how all this made sense. And a lot of that has to do with the nature of free will, predetermination, space-time, mass, energy. I mean, I had to go very, very deep into so much of what is known about reality to come up with a consistent message. But the book was being written for the general public. And so a tremendous amount of what I had to explain to myself was just too much to burden the general reader with, although I'm working on a book that will consolidate a lot of those kind of higher points. But that's not going to be for the faint of heart, because it's all about the real fundamentals of existence.
Yeah, that's right. I will also say it's a page turner. It's one of those books, I kept saying to myself, I'll read one more chapter, and then I'd be like, oh no, one more chapter. Oh no, it really is. It's actually there's no yawn moments at all. It's like, oh no.
Yeah, it does kind of grab you and take off, and that was another part of it. Was I wanted something that would be kind of lean and mean and get the core message across to the general reader without being some painful lap across the wilderness, but really kind of take them to the next level very efficiently.
Yeah, you did a great job, because it tells a story really, and people love stories, and it's the stories that keep us interested. All right, let's talk a little bit about it. Let's I know, as our audience knows from watching other of these interviews, you can't put things in chronological order with any degree of accuracy, but because we're human, you have to, right? So I'm going to ask you to put some chronological order in, as you did in the book, because you knew that. And let's just start sort of if you could pick a starting point, where did it start? You talked about the realm of the earthworm's eye view in the book.
Okay, well, again, important thing to note is that my first awareness deep in coma, I had no memory of my personal life, of, humans and the earth, this universe. That stuff was all deleted at the beginning. And then I was in a very monotonous, kind of foamy, completely unresponsive realm that I call the earthworm's eye view, and was there for a very long time. And I might have a question in my mind about what, who, where, and never anything of an answer at all. Just this boiling mud, occasional faces of animals, kind of grotesque, bubbling out of the mud and then going back in. Some chant or roar, pounding mechanical sound deep below. And after what seemed like an eternity in that monotonous realm, there was a spinning, filamentous white light that was coming towards me. And it was beautiful, with this melody, this lovely, perfect melody, totally different from that monotonous, pounding, mechanical sound I'd been hearing for eons. And as this light spun slowly towards me, and emphasizing here, I had no body awareness at all. I was just a piece of awareness. And as this light came towards me, it opened up, and it was a rip in that ugly fabric around me. And it was a portal into this lovely valley, very verdant, bright, ascending up in the valley, and moving because I was a speck on a butterfly wing. And this lovely butterfly with colors beyond description that was doing a lazy fly through down into the greenery, millions of other butterflies in this colorful river of life. And we would swoop by, and flowers blossoming, tree buds that would open up as we flew by, and a sense that below us on the ground were these, what I called in my early writings, peasants, but I think they were souls, dancing, lots of joy and merriment, children playing, dogs jumping, and these beautiful waterfalls and pools up above, these arcs of luminescent beings swooping with lovely anthems, chants, hymns coming down crescendo after crescendo. And I ended up calling them angels in my writing. And just a beautiful world, although it had earthly trappings. It had these plants and flowers and butterflies and the peasants dancing in their vividly colored outfits, but earthly trappings. So clearly, I call that the gateway, not to be confused with the true heaven, which was in the core, because on this butterfly wing beside me was a lovely, lovely girl dressed in the same kind of peasant clothing as the people below us, and she had the most beautiful smile as she looked at me with her sparkling blue eyes. And I didn't have any language or words at the time, but her thoughts went straight into my mind. You are loved, you are cherished deeply forever. There's nothing you can do wrong in that realm, not in the earthly realm. Nothing you can do wrong, and that you have nothing to fear. And it was the most comforting thing I mean, the words do not do justice to feeling that unconditional powerful, eternal love that she was projecting. And then there was this warm breeze, like a perfect summer breeze that blew through, and that was my first awareness of the divine, of the all-powerful, all-knowing, and infinitely loving, in an unconditional fashion, creator that was behind every bit of it. And from that awareness, all of that collapsed. Everything collapsed. The universe collapsed. Higher dimensional space and time, everything collapsed down. And I entered that third realm, which I call the core. And that was infinite in size, infinite blackness, no boundaries. I mean, imagine the all of higher dimensional space-time, all of eternity there before me, and yet sensing the boundaries of infinity, there were no boundaries. And the sound of the Om, which is what I call that divine being, that all-powerful creator, when I was writing this up, because any of our words at all, earthly words like God, things like that, were so limiting and kind of diminished the power and awe of that presence. And so my reference to that deity, which I think most people would say, yes, that sounds like God, my reference to that in those first writings for the first few months, I used the word Om, because Om was actually the sound I heard that was, in essence, it was the resonance of that divine, all-loving being throughout higher dimensional space and all of eternity. And of course, when I say resonance, people with any kind of physics background are thinking, well, this implies that there's some boundaries and there's a kind of a bouncing of waves and energy. But in all of eternity, that was exactly what that sounded like, when it was kind of the integration of all of everything over all of time. That was that being, was that Om. No gender to that Om at all. And like I said, any descriptive words in our earthly realm fall woefully short of describing the power and awe of that being. And of course, that realization also showed me why our science, our current level of science, and even the potential for any of our scientific understanding in the material physicalist world will never, ever be able to weigh in pro or con to the existence of that deity, because that deity is so far beyond our wildest imagination and dreams as human beings stuck in human brain and body. And what I found was that when I entered that core, I was with this brilliant orb of light, brighter than a million suns, and that infinite darkness, but the infinite blackness contained every bit of that overpowering love, unconditional love. And it was totally outside of this universe. And when I say me, believe me, this was consciousness of all eternity and of all consciousness throughout the multiverse. This was not Eben Alexander's little conscious mind wandering on this journey, but it was all of us. And this is something that I think resonates with people with souls, because our souls do remember this. They know this deeply. And I'm just reminding souls of something they already know, trying to uncover that knowing that's within each and every one of us by being conscious. And that's another blessing from my journey, is you don't have to almost die to get this. In fact, just by being conscious, using centering prayer, deep meditation, these are ways that each and every one of us can get in touch with that absolute connection of that divine within each one of us that is there to give us that knowing of love and of our connectedness to each other and to all that exists, by quieting that little voice of kind of fear and anxiety in our head, and going deep into our own consciousness, and we can all get in touch with exactly what I encountered in the core.
Wow. That's amazing. All right. So many things that you talked about there. I'll back up a little bit. All right, let's just go to the butterfly, because, I saw you on TV a couple times. You talked about floating on the butterfly wing, and I thought, oh, the skeptics are going to love that. Because it sounds very woo-woo. And what I'm wondering, though, is because I've recognized that, when people have near-death experiences, or my understanding is when we go to the spirit world, we're able to have whatever experience we want up there. Okay, whatever we can imagine, we can have. I'm wondering, was this idea of floating on the butterfly wing something that maybe, again, I know there was no sense of you as Eben Alexander, but do you think it was more related, like it's just your experience, or are people to take it very literally, that there are butterflies floating around there and the way we travel around is on the wing of them?
That's an excellent question. I mean, I would point out here that I see, I now see near-death experiences and afterlife reports going back 2,500 years, to the Egyptian Book of the Dead, Plato. I see the similarities far more than I focus on the differences, because I see an underlying reality of an afterlife realm that's very real. It's more real and more fundamental than this earth-like reality that we live in. And I think that's very, very important. It's also important to realize I now see consciousness. I know from my experience, it proved to me that our spirit, our soul, is eternal. That consciousness, we are conscious in spite of our brain. And that's a very important concept. The brain is more of a reducing valve, a filter or a veil. And it's there for a purpose, that we are not always privy to that spiritual realm. Part of the problem, of course, is we would be inundated because our higher soul, not limited down here on this side of the veil in the brain and body and in our little kind of earth-like existence, that higher soul is not stuck in space and time at all, and is actually aware of a much richer reality that extends through all eternity. And we really need to dumb that down to a trickle to have the stuff that's necessary for surviving in the here and now as a mammal, kind of going along with Darwinian selection on this earth. I mean, we can't know all of that when we're down here in the down and dirty physical realm. But there are ways that we can get back to it, get in touch with it, to peer behind that veil. And again, that has to do with deep meditation and with centering prayer. I would say also what I call the gift of desperation, which is often the way I saw this happen in my patients with terminal illnesses or family members. It's at that moment when your sense of loss is so great that you don't feel you could possibly handle any more, that often people would describe feeling that infinite love of God for them, and to know that they were loved and cherished and would be protected, and that it was all okay after all. And it's getting in touch with that, and again, through deep meditation. I have to do that first and foremost by getting rid of that little voice in my head, that little voice of self, ego, that is, that's not the decision maker, and that's who I am. I actually witness. That's how I know that the real I, which is the real us, which is all connected to the one at the core, needs to put that little voice in time out, because that voice of fear and anxiety, the self ego, that is not the real me at all, and it needs to be turned off for me to get in touch with the much deeper aspects of our connectedness and oneness and that divine link to God.
Yeah. So I'll just back up a little bit on that. So would you say, are we talking it's more of a metaphor, the butterfly experience, or literal?
As I say, just the facts, ma'am. I mean, I just wrote the story as I remembered it. I wasn't editing it. I wasn't trying to write it for anybody, to please anybody. I wasn't thinking about, literary metaphors. This is what I remembered. And of course, you're right. There are the skeptics out there. Oh, this is ridiculous. Butterfly wing, beautiful girl. Yeah. Well, guess what? It's what I remember. I didn't add things. It was actually a richer story than I portray in the book, because we did edit some of that original core story out. Parts of it that are very illuminating about overall journey. Those are pieces that I often discuss in my presentations, so you can often hear that in presentations, and of course a lot of that will also be featured in my second book, kind of a real fleshing out of the lessons that I learned in the core and what it all means. I mean, I go into, in the book, the whole notion of love, of that unconditional and infinite love of the Creator for each and every one of us, how that is the actual fabric of makeup of the higher dimensional aspects of this realm, and that evil is here as a trace impurity. It's all about our manifesting the love of that Creator, showing compassion and love for our fellow souls, even when we're down here in this kind of dumbed down earthly realm. That is the reason for our existence, is to manifest that love even in this imperfect world. And so none of this is metaphorical. I will say, I was reassured when I started reading some of Elizabeth Kubler-Ross's works, and found that when she had toured some of the concentration camps, and right after the end of World War II, she was absolutely stricken with the fact that often children who were being led into gas chambers were carving butterflies in the wood. And she puzzled over this for decades, and then finally came to see how butterflies were very often seen in that afterlife realm, and also stories of the giant tornado, and how the children reported butterfly angels that saved them, and some amazing stories. But it's not a metaphor. This is what I remembered, and I'm just reporting it.
Yeah, and I love that, because you could have, I'm sure you foresaw, what some people would think of that, and you could have opted to not tell that part of the story, but we can see how important it was that you did.
To me, it was not my place to be editing strongly, because I thought something would be unpopular. And likewise, I wasn't going to add things in that weren't there. Yeah. I think a lot of people, say in the fundamentalist Christian realm, would prefer that I had seen Jesus. Well, I'm sorry, I didn't see Jesus, so I didn't put him in there, but I did see a loving God that was every bit the one that Jesus knew and talked about, and that infinitely loving God is exactly who we saw and came to know very deeply, and also came to realize that we all know that God very deeply, and we can get in touch with that deep in our own consciousness.
You know, you talked a little bit about the evil. One of the things I thought was important that you mentioned in the book was that evil made free will possible. I mean, you touched upon that just a moment ago, but I loved the idea that the evil on our planet, for instance, in our physical existence, is what makes our human free will possible. Anything to expand on that?
Really, just that. I must say, when I came back from this and realized and had felt the power of that omnipotent and all-loving God, it was hard to reconcile that with some of the evil and injustice that is allowed in our world. Especially, I wrestled with the suffering of innocent in our world, of children, animals. And I really had to struggle and learn a lot, knowing what I knew from my near-death experience and going into meditation a lot to keep uncovering some of the beautiful lessons there, to come to some kind of reconciliation about that. But it had to do very much with knowing that the love, that unconditional love, is so far beyond our imagination. I mean, that God loves each and every one of us far more than we love ourselves. And it explains so much about why belief was so encouraged by Jesus and by other teachers, because belief is what sets us free. To open ourselves to believe the possibility of it, then we can just go into our own consciousness and start to feel the power of that belief and to know that it actually manifests as reality in our lives, and that is because it's very real. It's fundamentally real. But we're supposed to live in a realm on this side of the veil where we don't know. It's not as clear as, say, the moon rising in the sky every night. If the spiritual realm and the reality of God in heaven were as real as the moon rising every night, we would not be able to treat this existence appropriately for our progress in the higher realm. We would not have the proper respect for this. And so there has to be that element of faith and belief. And that's why science will never prove, pro or con, the existence of that realm. Also, that God is so far beyond our wildest dreams, imaginations as human beings, that to even think that we could come close to proving yes or no is hubris of the highest order.
Well, I know a lot of our audience right now is probably wondering, when we're talking about these things, any sense that there is such a thing as hell, and you might follow it up. You talked about the light and the darkness. I realize it's a different subject, but when you talk about the light and the darkness, what I've heard about other people say about near-death experiences is that the darkness, there was light within the darkness, that the darkness was a very friendly, velvety, multi-dimensional, multi-sensory experience. But I know that a lot of people are wondering, we're talking about the evil here in the physical world, any sense that there was any sense of hell, and is that related at all to what you said about there being darkness?
Well, in fact, in terms of the evil, in terms of the badness, for those who hand out mayhem and pain and agony to others, they end up reaping what they sow, because in the life review, when they leave this body and go through their life review, they end up living that pain and agony that they dished out in every single instance as the recipient. And it's much worse in that pure spiritual realm to feel the agony of that pain that they've caused others. So in that sense, you could say there is a hell. There's not, in my view, there is not the eternal damnation that is pictured in kind of classic Christianity. And the reason for that is this God is so perfect and so loving and so all-powerful that there's no way that part of that creation would be an eternal damnation. This is all about our spirits, our souls ascending in that outer realm and getting closer and closer to that all-loving Godhood. And it has to do with our learning lessons in this life. And that's why I look at hardship, difficulty, challenges, and as a healer, I look at disease and illness as the opportunities for growth. And our souls are here to learn lessons, and we learn them through the difficulties in this life. By embracing those difficulties and seeing them as learning opportunities, realizing that by manifesting that love and compassion in this imperfect realm, that is how we progress in that higher spiritual realm. And given that the whole direction of that and the fabric of that higher realm is made of that love, and that evil is but an impurity that allows us to manifest our free will, given that the ascendance in that outer realm has everything to do with moving towards that unconditional love from the Creator to the creation, anyone who's handing out mayhem and pain in this world is going to have to make up for that wrongward direction, either in this life or in other lives. So it's, to me, that all is kind of the way I have to put it together. It does involve reincarnation as a very necessary part of it.
Yeah, that's true. The way it's written up in the book, there's sort of an end to this experience where you leave the core, you move away from the core and go back to that sort of muddy existence. But it's different than the first time you experienced it. Tell us about that.
Yeah, it was kind of shocking when I remembered all this and I was trying to make sense of it, because I would be in the core where I was told, "We will teach you many things, but you will be going back." And this was taught by this divine, dazzling darkness of love of that God beyond our wildest imagination, and this brilliant orb of light. And they were teaching many things, but I didn't know back where. And I would then end up without any kind of pathway or foreshadowing. I just would be back in the earthworm eye view. And it was very shocking the first time. I couldn't understand any of this, and I still had no language, and I was trying to put this together. But by remembering, and the first time it took a very long time, but by remembering that melody, the notes of the melody, they were crucial at bringing back that spinning white light, the beautiful filamentous light that came spinning up out of the muck and opened as a portal into this gorgeous gateway. On the butterfly wing, beautiful girl beside me. Every time I went back in there, and several times this happened, where I would fall into the earthworm eye view, and then I had to remember the notes of the melody, spin that up, and I'd be back on the butterfly wing in the gateway with the beautiful girl, always that same lovely face, comforting thoughts of pure, unconditional love, that I would be taken care of and cherished, and then outside of this universe, outside of all of eternity, to be taught more lessons by the orb of light and by that beautiful, loving presence. And it did happen several times. We're always saying, you will be going back. You're not here to stay. And one day that was true, where that spinning, trying to remember the notes didn't bring that spinning melody. And in fact, I was headed back down to the earthly realm. I didn't know or remember it at the time. And it was then that I became aware of the power of prayer, because I sensed these arcs of beings, everyone kneeling, many cloaked, holding candles, and there was this murmuring coming up from them, and there were thousands of them going off into the darkness, some with candles, and that murmuring and that energy was billowing these beautiful, brilliant clouds that were kind of bubbling me up and bringing me back up to this realm. And when I was writing it all up a few weeks later, the word I used was that they were praying for me, because that's exactly what they were doing. That word was not in my mind at the time.
Yeah.
In a sense, it was very comforting, because when I had found that the melody no longer worked to take me into that beautiful realm, I was very sad. I mean, sad beyond description, that the gates of heaven were closed. And that is when I had this beautiful vision of those praying for me and how they were on earth. This was not from any earthly scene, but that was the origin of that scene, of thousands of people kneeling and murmuring, and the energy coming from it. And that's what I often tell healthcare workers and families of very sick patients in talking about this, is never, ever think that the soul of that loved one is not present, and that the prayers get in. And I don't try and tell people that I came back because of prayer. I mean, there was a lot of prayer in my case, but I've known many similar cases as a neurosurgeon where wonderful families, patients with terminal diseases, lots of prayer, and yet that patient did not come back to us physically. And it wasn't for any lack of prayer or belief. But the important thing is the prayers do get in. And I don't care if the patient has already been pronounced dead in our medical terms. Know that that soul is present and aware, and how you treat that and how you think about that is very important. And so prayer does have tremendous power, and it's very comforting to that soul that is being prayed for.
That's really important to hear. A great reminder. Is there a wrong way to pray? Is there a right way to pray?
I think just by believing and by knowing that there's a divine plan, thy will, not mine, be done. Mm-hmm. For those 8 years before my coma, I'd given up on God, given up on prayer. I was praying for the wrong things, and I was trying to pray for things that, that my ego and self might want, and those prayers went unanswered. And just know there's a divine plan. And just have faith that that love will carry us through whatever we face in this realm.
I also like the idea, when you were going back to the earthworm view after leaving the core, and then you thought about the spinning melody again, and it brought you back up. I thought, what a wonderful metaphor. I understand that's a real experience, but it was what a wonderful metaphor for our physical life here. When we're feeling down, when things are down, when things are bad, to think of light, to have faith, those types of things. I wonder if it works the same way. You get the sense that it does. It lifts us up.
Very much, and my youngest sister Phyllis often tells me that when I first was waking up on that 7th morning and the doctors were shocked, he can't be coming back, and ended up pulling the breathing tube out. I'd been on a ventilator all week, and she came up within minutes of my coming out of all this, and she said I looked like a little Buddha sitting there on the bed, and I would look around at each one of the people, doctors, nurses, family, totally shocked that I was back. And I'd look at each one of them kind of acknowledging the divine miracle that we're here. And each breath is a miracle. And I would say, all is well.
Wow.
Worry.
Yeah, that's amazing.
Well. And we are loved, cherished, and cared for. And by believing it and then feeling it deep in our own consciousness, feeling that divine connection, quieting that voice, the voice of fear and anxiety, the little voice in our head that's just a spectator, and getting in touch with that divine connection that we all share. And that's why it's all about loving each other, because by loving each other, we're loving ourselves and acknowledging that divine link that we all share at the deepest level.
That's beautiful. That's beautiful. Let's talk a little bit. So the woman that you met, the girl that you met on the butterfly wing, more of like an angel or guide to you, the first being that you saw, I think, again, very compelling evidence that your experience was real and not imagined, is her identity. Do you mind sharing with us that?
I want to put out a spoiler alert.
Okay.
Because my preference is people read my book and feel what I felt. And that's what I try to present in the book, the way it's all laid out. So for those of you who really want to get the power of it and haven't read the book, spoiler alert right now. It turns out that I was adopted. I was put up for adoption when I was 2 weeks old, adopted age 4 months. And for a lot of my life, I looked for my birth mother through the North Carolina Children's Home. North Carolina had pretty strict laws. Never found that there was any interest on her part in finding me. And I adjusted to that. That's fine. I mean, she was going on with her life, and they left me to go on with my life, and I was okay with that. And then my son was doing a research project in school in 6th grade in the year 2000 when he wanted to find out more about our family heritage. And he wouldn't let it go when I told him about my adoptive family heritage. He wanted to know about our biological family. So I thought I'd humor him. I wrote a letter to the North Carolina Children's Home, and I actually got a response back. Well, yes, we did find something out, and I detail all that in my book. It was a shocking 2 minutes in my life back in February 2000. Finding out that, in fact, my birth parents got married, which was a big shock based on all the information I had, that they had 3 children, that my youngest sister had passed over in 1998, and that they were still grieving, and it was not a good time to come back in their lives. And that sent me in a tailspin. That was, in fact, why I lost all faith in a loving, personal God, lost all faith in prayer in 2000. And that was lost for 8 years until my coma. And now, of course, that's all been healed forever. I will never, ever doubt the eternity of our souls and that all-loving God. But it turns out that as I was trying to understand the depth of my experience, and it was clearly a very powerful transcendental experience, and yet as I read more and more about near-death experiences, I was mystified. Why wasn't my father there? My adoptive father had passed over 4 years before my coma. And if I had scripted this, he would have been there front and center, but he was nowhere to be seen. And who was this mysterious girl? I could remember her face so perfectly. I knew I'd never met her in my whole life. So why was she there? And how come my dad wasn't there? And this was a deal breaker. I mean, I knew I'd had a profound spiritual experience when my brain should have supported no experience at all. So how come? Why? Such a deep mystery to it. And it was 4 months out from coma when I actually was able to put it all together. My birth sister Kathy had promised to send me a picture of Betsy, the sister who had passed on in 1998. And she did send that picture, and that was a very powerful emotional experience. She just looked so familiar, and it was the next morning when I was reading a story in Elizabeth Kubler-Ross about a girl who had a profound near-death experience, was in coma, and encountered her brother, and he gave her such beautiful, unconditional love of that realm. And they had the most adoring time together, and she was so blessed with it, but then he helped her make a decision to go back to Earth. And she did, and when she came back, she was mystified and talking with her father. I don't understand. I don't have a brother. And her father said, well, you did. He died 3 months before you were born, and we never told you about him. And I looked up at that picture that my birth sister had just sent me of my departed birth sister Betsy, and I knew exactly who had been on the butterfly wing. It was the most powerful experience I've ever had in this life. I was absolutely certain of the identity, and yet, since I didn't really know her personality so well, I was just shocked at the power of this. But I said, it can't be. I mean, that's too amazing. And so then I started calling my birth family every week or so. I would call and ask them questions, trying to get to know Betsy better. And as they told me more and more about how she had been this all-loving soul who would bring in stray cats and dogs and give them a home and feed them. And she worked in a rape crisis center and just took care of people that needed caring. And she was such a loving soul, often described as an angel. And it just became absolutely clear to me, of course, that's who it was. And the visual memory was perfect. And it's because that's who it was.
Wow. Okay, there's chills right there. So, and the reason I brought it up, I know it's a spoiler alert, but I know that a lot of the news stations have asked you in their 5-minute interviews that are all edited up. And I had 2 people come to me and say, could you ask them, because they hadn't read the book yet, can you ask them because I'm so confused by that? And, so anyways, this is nice because you had the time to be able to really explain it in depth. What a beautiful story. What a beautiful ending to the book. Really beautiful ending to this, to this interview that we have here. All I can say is I hope people will go out and buy the book. I know they will. Everybody else in the country, if not the world, is doing it. Even with knowing that, I kind of suspected all the way through. Anyways, but even without knowing that, it's a page turner. You never know what's going to happen. It's amazing all the way through. As we close down here, and I wish it didn't have to happen because I wish I could talk to you for another few hours. You touched upon our reasons for existence here. I know that's probably a book in itself. Can we just end with maybe you just giving us a little sense of what we're doing here?
Yeah, it's such a beautiful message, and in many ways it's so simple. And what my experience very plainly demonstrates is that our consciousness, our spirit, our soul is eternal. We are spiritual beings. It is not dependent on the brain. And we are so much more than our physical bodies. And our true reason for being here as a spirit and soul extends far beyond the simple materialistic view that it just goes birth to death and that's all there is. We are so much more than that. And our relationships with our fellow souls are far richer than that, as is the meaning and the purpose for our being here at all.
Okay, powerful. Absorb that minute. Let me just show the title while everybody's absorbing that. Show the cover of the book again. You'll know it. You're on the back there. Proof of Heaven, Neurosurgeon's Journey into the Afterlife. There'll be a link below this video where people can get it on Amazon, can order it on Amazon. You've been a delight. You're a delight in so many ways. What a great guest, and you can feel your warmth and the love that you have in telling this story. And I'm really grateful for you joining us today, Eben. I thank you.
And I also wanted to ask people to visit Eternia, ETERNEA.org, which is a site that we've started to educate people about all manner of spiritually transformative experiences, just near-death experiences. And people can report their own experiences there, plus educational to help people understand consciousness, physics of consciousness, and how our spiritual existence is primary and science and spirituality can come together. That's a huge part of my message and my mission.
What is that website again?
Eternia.org, ETERNEA.org.
Okay. And your personal website is what?
Is lifebeyonddeath.net.
Okay. All right. Those links will be below the video as well, and I'm sure everybody's going to want to visit those and learn more. So anyways, maybe we'll get to talk to you again in the future. I know you're going to have another book coming out, or maybe you just want to tell us more of the story, but either way, thanks a lot.
Thank you, Bob. I appreciate it.
All right, bye now.